Greetings, Peace Webs, Jake here. So as you can tell by the title of this video, the question I'm proposing in this video is Isildur a villain or a hero? So the reason why I'm proposing this is because in the movies, we get a different version of Isildur versus Isildur in the books. So, let's first go over Isildur in the movies. In the cold open, we see, the kind of last stage of the War of the Last Alliance, where Sauron enters the field. He kills Elendil, he kills Gil-galad, the king of, Gondor, Arnor, and the Elvish High King. Then afterwards, that's when we see Isildur cut the ring. So it happens a little bit different in the books. So basically, in the books, Elendil and Gil-galad kill Sauron, but he kills them in the process, and afterwards, that's when Isildur cuts the ring from Sauron's finger, and he kind of claims that as his weregild. So basically, like a reward for slaying his opponent. So in the movies, he grabs his father, Elendil's sword. He just kind of like slashes out, cuts the ring off Sauron's finger, and then Sauron just kind of basically like implodes, and his armor just kind of collapses on the ground. So, it's not entirely, different from the books. However, where the big shift happens with differences, and I understand why they made the difference, which I'll go into. So in the movies, we see Elrond, he kind of takes Isildur to the cracks of Mount Doom, where the ring will forge, and tells him to destroy it. Cast in the fire, destroy it, and Isildur says no. So it's a little bit different in the books, because basically Tolkien states that Elrond was present along with Círdan, the shipwright, the oldest elf in all of Middle-earth. And so basically they do counsel Isildur once he cuts the ring off Sauron's finger to destroy it. But unlike the movies where he says no because he kind of falls to the corruption, and I understand that they Peter Jackson wanted to really emphasize the power of the One Ring and its corruptive abilities. So it took one of the greatest humans, and basically corrupted him in like a matter of seconds, basically. To where Isildur was just like, this is mine. I'm not going to destroy it. Whereas there's a little bit to that in the books, but Isildur, as far as we know, Elrond and Círdan don't take him to the cracks of Mount Doom. They just counsel him, hey, destroy it. And he says, no, not because he's fallen to the corruptive abilities of the ring, but because of his pride. And he's kind of like, no, this ring, this is my prize, because this is what killed, my father and threatened us for, all this entire time. So this is now mine. Again, not out of corruption. Like, he hasn't fallen to the ring's corruptive abilities, but just pure pride. So again, not to say that Isildur in the books is perfect. He's definitely, he's still human, even though he's Númenórean who can live, the Númenóreans are kind of like the closest to perfection humans can be, but they are still not perfect. They're they're fallible. And that was one of Isildur's flaws, is his pride. However, even with his flaws, so after the War of the Last Alliance and Sauron's defeated, so Isildur, having, Elendil died, he was the High King of both Gondor and Arnor, the northern kingdom that was founded during the Númenórean exile, which that's a whole other thing, not going to go into in this video. But basically, when Elendil ruled the north, Isildur and his brother Anarion ruled Gondor. And they kind of co-ruled, which kind of speaks to the character of Isildur, where he's the eldest son. He could have easily, once they arrived in Middle-earth, could have easily been like, well, I'm the eldest son, so obviously I'm the heir to the throne, and I have the most authority. But instead, he allowed his brother Anarion to have co-rulership over Gondor. And even after the war, so Anarion dies in the war, and he leaves his nephew, Amundil? Could be wrong. I'll have to get back to that. But he leaves his nephew, like Anarion's son. So he spends a year after, Sauron's been defeated, And again, he could have also, like, risen to high kingship like his father Elendil of both Gondor and Arnor. But instead, he basically stays in Gondor for a year just to make sure that, like, everything's in order for his nephew to basically take over. So all the boring paperwork stuff, he stays just to kind of, again, ensure that his nephew is set up for success. So, I think this really speaks to Isildur as a character, to where he had every opportunity to basically achieve even more, power and influence and all that, but instead, even with the ring, he just is like, yeah, no, like, I'll let my nephew rule the south and Gondor, I'll go north to Arnor and rule as my father did, and, everything's good. Um, but it wasn't until Isildur started to go north, and yeah, after that year period, once he left Gondor in good hands, he realized that he couldn't master the ring, because that's where his pride came in. Is Isildur was kind of, and also like kind of contrary to a lot of the other ring bearers, where he realized pretty soon that he couldn't master the One Ring like he initially thought. Um, and so the whole reason why he was going north is to, one, pick up his wife and his young son, who was in Rivendell with Elrond, and also to kind of like go to Elrond and kind of get counsel of like, hey, so basically he was planning on leaving the One Ring with Elrond and Círdan, to the ring bearers of the Elvish rings of power, and probably also to kind of get their counsel of like, hey, what do I do with this now? Should we destroy it? What should we do? And then that's in so if you've watched the movies, the extended editions, that's when you see Isildur. He puts on the ring, he crosses that river, the River Anduin, and he gets shot with several arrows and dies. So again, sort of similar in the books, or more so the appendices, where it kind of details a little bit more of this information. But basically, when Isildur is moving north, he's got one of his sons, Ilendor, who I think is his last eldest son left. So I want to say he lost one of his sons in the War of the Last Alliance. But anyways, so one of his sons, he's got a kind of a small force that he's going north because, again, he's pride. He kind of just assumed with Sauron dead, the orcs are probably not going to be a huge threat. But the orcs, as it turns out, are still a big threat. And so they ambush Isildur and his, small force as they're moving northward in the Gladden Fields. And basically his son kind of, like, urges him, is like, hey, look, the only way you have to survive. The only way you survive is if you put on that ring and, go invisible and make your way north to Rivendell. And what I like about this is in the appendices, Isildur is kind of, he basically realizes, he's like, I don't know if I should put this thing on, because I realize that I have not been able to master it like I initially thought I could. And he's probably aware that, like, if he does put it on, it could have negative ramifications, like it does for the other ring bearers, like Bilbo, Frodo, later on, or even Gollum. But basically, to his son's beckoning, he's kind of like, look, this is the only way, like, if anyone has to survive this, it has to be you. And so Isildur kind of reluctantly agrees, and basically even says, like, hey, forgive me for, basically, I'm the one responsible for all of you dying. And as he's swimming across the River Anduin, he reaches an island, kind of like midway in the river. But as he's swimming, that's when he loses, like, the ring slips off his finger. Because the ring, basically being a sort of sentient being, realizes that Isildur is not a proper, or it's not fit to be a ring bearer, because it doesn't really have anything to latch on to really corrupt him. Like, yes, he's got his pride, but even with his pride, Isildur is wise enough to realize that he shouldn't have the ring after, a year of having it, that he can't master it, and it just needs to go to wiser people like the elves. And so that's when the ring, essentially, is just like, Yep, I'm out, dude. You are no use to me. And slips off his finger. And once he reaches that little island, that's when he gets pierced by several orcish arrows and he dies. So again, similar to the scene in the extended edition of the Fellowship. Um, and so again, even though Isildur gets a bit of a bad reputation based on the movies, which again, like I said, I understand why Peter Jackson and his team decided to go that route, just to really show just how corruptive and powerful the influence of the One Ring was. But if you read the books and the appendices, you definitely realize that Isildur, to answer the question of this video, now Isildur, he gets a bad reputation. He's a pretty solid dude. He didn't give in to the corruption of the ring. He just gave in to kind of basic human flaws. Like again, pride and anything that makes just about any other human flawed, whether it be your pride or whatever it may be, lack of self confidence. Um, you know, pick your poison. But the fact that Isildur realized this and sought out the Council of Elrond and Círdan and the other elves, I think really speaks volumes about the character and why he's such an important character. Because again, another thing too with the movies is, and I totally understand it, they wanted to make Aragorn a little bit more relatable, where he's kind of reluctant to take on the kingship of Gondor, whereas in the books, Aragorn is very much, he's very proud of his heritage, and kind of announces pretty regularly that he's kind of like, he's the heir to Isildur, and he's the wielder of Narsil, or later Andria once it's reforged. But again, I definitely like that shift, more so for Aragorn in the movies, because again, I think it makes it a little bit more relatable. But digressing. So all that to say is, I definitely see why that change was made for the movies. But that being said, I do think Isildur gets a little bit of a bad reputation, and he's seen as kind of a weak. Just immediately gives in to the temptation of the ring, which is not true for the character from the books. But yeah, so that is my opinion on the video, or the topic of the video, and I feel like is pretty lore accurate to what Tolkien stated. But if you disagree, or let me, if you disagree with either my take, or if you think that the movie's version was better, leave your comments below and do usual YouTubey stuff like comment, subscribe, comment, all that jazz. And until next time, everyone, cheers.